Welcome back to the House of Hoosier podcast presented by the Field of 68 Podcast Network. I'm Ian Plaskoff, joined by Colin McMahon of On3 Indiana. A little rebranding going from rivals to On3. Colin, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me. And yes, TheHoosier.com is a part of the On3 network where we were happy to join, and it'll be another exciting year of coverage for me and everybody else.
So the thought process here at House of Hoosier was to kind of let the offseason breathe a little bit, let things run their course, and then come all the way together and bring everything together after everything took place. So I feel like it's a good point right now. The roster's not completely done per se, but Darian DeVries has done some serious work. And before we get into that, I think it's worth noting who left, which is pretty much everybody, Colin. Um, we'll just go through, look at some destinations, see what sticks out. Just going down the list, Malik Renew is off to Miami. Gabe Cupps, Ohio State. Ja'Kai Newton, Georgia State. Miles Rice to Maryland. Mackenzie Mbako to Texas A&M. Bryson Tucker to Washington. And then two uncommitted players right now, Kaden Carlisle and Dallas James, both still in the portal. Colin, what sticks out to you most from that list?
I would say the guys that stayed in conference, Miles Rice going to Maryland, and then Bryson Tucker going to Washington. It'll be interesting to see how those two play out. The schedule got released yesterday of who Indiana's going to play home or away. The Hoosiers will host Washington and will play away at Maryland. So Miles Rice will not get to play in Assembly Hall next season, but Bryson Tucker will. And so that's obviously an interesting scenario. Mackenzie Mbako going to Texas A&M, that's obviously another interesting one. They'll have a new head coach, Bucky McMillan, coming over from Samford. But then, you know, obviously IU has a lot of players going across the country, but it's interesting to see how Dallas James and Kanan Carlisle remain uncommitted. Most players have committed, and I'm wondering what their thought process is there. Are they trying to get the best NIL offer? Are they trying to seek out, with Carlisle's sake, a top program? He hasn't really been rumored to go to any Power Five school. So I'm wondering, when those commitments are going to come. Obviously, for Indiana's sake, doesn't really matter where they end up unless they end up in conference, but it'll be interesting there.
Yeah, with Carlisle and James, it's like James didn't step foot on the floor last year, and Carlisle shot, what, 29% from the field? Like, they're not going to change a Power Five program. And what we're seeing out of guys at the top of the list of this list of transfers, like Renew, I think could make a big impact at Miami. Rice could make an impact at Maryland. I think Bryson Tucker still has some untapped potential. And then Mc this is the biggest thing also for me. Mackenzie Mbako is going to love that Texas A&M system. I mean, Bucky McMillan will tell his guys to take every open look for three, and Mackenzie Mbako will not turn that down one bit. So I'm excited to see that. Carlisle and James, yeah, I saw some kind of connection with Carlisle to McNeese. I don't know
Hmm.
how strong that is. Dallas James, I'm not really sure. Um, but another big one for me, Gabe Cupps to Ohio State. That's another one of those in-conference transfers that you mentioned, Colin. I think Cupps could be a good fit with the Buckeyes. They lost some talent. I think, I don't think he's going to start, but I think he could be a strong six-man, an impact player for the Buckeyes in his junior season.
Yeah, exactly. And Gabe Cupps, when I was listening, the guys that went in conference, he slipped my mind because he only played in a couple games for IU last year. And yeah, you're right. He's another one of those. They are going to the Hoosiers will go to Columbus next season, so he will not be playing at Assembly Hall as well. So yeah, those three guys in conference is very interesting. And then you have obviously a lot of guys coming in. IU currently has a 11 or 12 players on the roster, depending on Luke Goody's waiver. So, you know, they're bringing in a lot of talent, but they are losing a lot of talent. And so obviously we'll get into kind of the roster turnover there as well.
Yeah, you talk about it. I mean, Darren DeVries in his opening press conference said that it was going to be a lot different than what we saw with Mike Woodson's style of play. It's going to be a first 12 seconds type of offense with a lot of three-point shooting. And that's what this lineup or the roster as it stands right now looks to be. I mean, there really isn't a true big man that we've seen, when Umar Balla last year, Khalil Ware the year before that, and of course, Trace Jackson Davis the 2 years before that. We're not really seeing that with this group that's incoming. And as it stands right now, the current Indiana basketball roster, as of this morning, I have more points in Assembly Hall as a student at Indiana University than anybody that is currently on this roster. I just want to put that out there. We played some knockout in Jeremy Gray's sportscasting class this morning in the hall. So I just wanted to claim my fame there that I've scored more than everybody on this roster currently not penning a waiver.
Who won that? Who won that game of knockout today?
Um, Well, I also would like to say before the winners for this year are Austin Platt, of course, who is moving on to new things. He'll be walking the stage in a couple days. His time is over with our podcast. But Austin Platt won last year, I believe. Uh, who did win? We played about 3 games. I did not win any of them. I made a couple shots, and that was all I wanted. I just wanted to make a couple shots in the hall and go about my day. I don't remember who won, Colin, but I will get back to you on that as
Okay.
soon as I can. But yeah, we talk about the waivers. Luke Goody has scored in Assembly Hall as a student of Indiana University, but he is not currently on the roster pending that medical waiver, as is Tucker DeVries. DeVries is more likely to get that waiver. Still no update on Goody, but DeVries should be good to go. He missed pretty much all of last year. But yeah, Colin, I think we should just go through all these new additions. This roster is going to look very different as a whole. Lots of guards, lots of wings, and not a lot of height. That's where I want to start.
Yeah, it's a bit interesting just because it's different than the Mike Woodson era. And that was probably the biggest gripe of Indiana fans during the last 4 years. The two big lineups, the lack of shooting. Those are kind of the two things that you look at. Last year you had Umar Ballo and Malik Reneau at times playing together, and the offense kind of looked stagnant. It didn't really mesh the way it was supposed to. And then when you had one or the other in there, they were two different kinds of offense. Reneau, was more of a forward type, and then Ballo more of a center type. And so when you had one or the other, the offense worked so much better. And Reed Bailey is going to kind of be that stretch big. He's the transfer from Davidson. He was the Atlantic 10 most improved player in the last season. So he brings in a lot of talent. But like you said, a lot of wings. Tucker DeVries obviously comes to mind. Sam Alexis. And then you've got the most recent commit, Josh Harris is another wing, and you've got Nick Dorn, another wing. I mean, I'm looking at this roster right now, and it's wing after wing after wing. And I think that'll definitely play to Indiana's advantage. Shooting has obviously been a big thing for DeVries in the portal. They have that. They have athleticism and length at the wing position, not necessarily down low. And that's one thing to kind of monitor. There's a couple more spots on the roster. They may want to go get a big guy, not necessarily a big time pickup like Bala was, where he's gonna, start most games. Might be a bench big, but we'll see how that goes in the next coming weeks.
This past season, Austin and I talked so much about the style of play in the Big Ten compared to the SEC, compared to, you know, Big 12, ACC. And the Big Ten is so much more slow. It's so much more physical. And come tournament time, it doesn't seem to work. And the last time a Big Ten team won the national championship was, it's not even coming to the top of my head right now.
2000, Michigan
2000.
State in 2000. If you want to get nitpicky, Maryland won in 2002. They beat IU, obviously, but they were a member of the ACC now, so doesn't
Even
really count for
so,
the Big Ten thing.
Even so, that's 23 years since a team from the Big Ten that wasn't even in the Big Ten with Maryland
Exactly.
won the national championship. And that was also when college basketball was a little bit different, where everybody was more, somewhat in the Big Ten style. But Mike Woodson teams were not like that. Mike Woodson teams tended to play two bigs, play slow, play in the post, and play through the bigs versus through the guards. I'm not seeing that in this team right now. I'm seeing a modern style that's it. it works in college basketball. You saw all these postseason teams, they were all led by guard play. I mean, you look at the national championship, Elijah Martin, Walter Clayton Jr. Houston has tons of guards. You can't even name them all. Purdue in the Elite Eight, Braden Smith led their team, Fletcher Lawyer as well. It's just every good team that makes a run, it's guard play. And that's what Indiana emphasized here. I do want to go back to what you said about Reed Bailey. We'll just run through his stats right now. A 6'10 power forward and center he's listed as from Davidson. 18.8 points per game, 6.1 rebounds a game, and 3.8 assists per game in his last season. Shot just under 42% from three. He can do a little bit of everything. He passes the ball pretty well, sees the floor well, and then a three-level scorer can play in the post, can play outside. The rebounding numbers for a 6'10 forward center at 6.1 per game, you'd like to maybe see a little bit more there. But I think he could be a dynamic big man for Indiana that could really speed this offense up.
For sure. And, it's not a bad thing that IU doesn't really have a traditional big. You know, DeVries, I think his goal here, like you mentioned, is tournament success. And, like you said, Big Ten teams don't really seem to do well, even the ones with good guards. Like you saw Wisconsin this year, John Tanji, maybe the best guard in the entire league other than Braden Smith. They lost in the second round, and they were a great team throughout the entire season. I mean, they made Indiana in that game up in Madison in February look like an AAU team, you know? So I think that's what he's going for there. Like, obviously, you want to have Big Ten success, but, this sport, as it stands now, is all about the tournament. It just is with the viewership, with everything that goes along with it. You could have a phenomenal season and lose in the first or second round and 90% of America just remembers you as, oh, they were a team that lost in the first and second round. They probably weren't that good. Versus, you could be a team that's a lower seed and make a big run, and then wow, that team had a good season, even though like all they did was win 3 or 4 games in the NCAA tournament and got hot. So, you know, the coaching staff at Indiana won't say that. They're never going to admit that, but that's the reality of it. That's the way this sport is trending. And, when when the schools need to pay the players, that media money they got from the NCAA tournament and all the publicity, that's going to pay dividends. And that's really what matters.
Indiana's going more in the modern route with this roster. We've talked about Reed Bailey. He's really the only big man on this roster, but let's get into the guards. Of course, Tucker DeVries, he's more of a wing, but if he plays, he's going to have a big role on this team. But I think the biggest factor in this transfer class right now is Lamar Wilkerson. One of the best transfers in the country, picked Indiana over Kentucky. Um, in an interview with Jeff Goodman after he committed, he said he didn't want to go to Kentucky and just be another guy. And Darian DeVries made him feel like a priority, and he should be treated like a priority. Scored 20.5 points per game last year, shot 43% from three, 4 rebounds a game, a couple assists as well. A 6'5 shooting guard, he can score on all three levels. I mean, Colin, this is the guy. I mean, he played well in Bloomington this past year for Sam Houston State. And he really stood out to me, and I couldn't be happier for him to be an Indiana Hoosier.
Yeah, he really is a great player. And one of my favorite things about him right now is kind of the photo that's been most shared in, articles and social media posts is him shooting with the banners in the background. And I think that is an awesome picture to start, but he's the kind of guy that I'm getting ahead of myself that could lead you to that banner level success. Might not be an NCAA championship, but maybe, some Big Ten success or something like that. Because he's an impact player. He's a guy that can score on multiple levels. He's 6'5", he's a bigger guard. He's not going to get beat physically. And he's also a knockdown shooter. I mean, that was the thing that DeVries had mentioned in his introductory press conference. He's going to prioritize shooting and he's going to prioritize scoring fast. And that's something that Lamar Wilkerson can do. And I think fans are going to love him. I think, when he takes a shot from behind the three-point arc, the student section is gonna, put up that three, and a lot of them are gonna go in. And he's really a good player. But it's not just him. The guys around him, I feel like are gonna make him better. I think it's gonna be a great fit for the Hoosiers.
The other thing about Wilkerson, you talk about his height and size, 6'5", with good arms. He moves well. He prides himself on the defensive end. That's what he talked about in that interview after he committed most, was really improving on the defensive end. Um, and he really struck me as a team first guy. And I think that is something Indiana has lacked a little bit in past years, which is unfortunate. But he's a guy that could tie this team together. I think Wilkerson's going to be the headliner of this group. With him in the backcourt, though, there are a lot of options to choose from. Don't really know who's going to get the starting nod. If I had to say right now, it's Tatum Connerway, the Troy transfer. He's listed as a combo guard at 6'3", 14.2 points per game, about 5 assists per game. Didn't shoot well from three, 27%. Did rebound the ball well for a guard at 4.6 rebounds a game. Believe he was the Sun Belt Player of the Year this past year. This will be his sixth year of college basketball. Now, also to note about him, he is in the introductory stages of the NBA draft. Do I think he'll go through that process? I don't. I think he'll come to Indiana for a year. Um, but I think him and Wilkerson in the backcourt, if that is the duo, it's pretty dynamic. It could be interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think Connerway is, obviously it's Sillard. I think he's the projected point guard, if you will. He's one of the guys that doesn't necessarily have the shooting that the team as a whole would like, but you don't need every single guy on your team to shoot 35% plus from three. You need that distribution. You need a guy that can get to the rim and get a bucket when needed, and I think he'll be that guy. Troy made the NCAA tournament. They lost in the first round of Kentucky. Now, even though that they lost, that's still valuable experience, valuable tournament experience for a team as a whole who, a lot of guys transferring from mid-major programs don't necessarily have that. And he's a guy who transferred from a mid-major program and does have that experience. And so it might just be one game, but, it was a successful season for Troy, and he has the Sun Belt Player of the Year. That's a big award. But in addition to him, you've got two guys who are really good and who come from the same program in North Florida. And I'll leave it to you, Ian, to talk about those two impact players.
Yeah, one of them just committed, believe it was yesterday. The other has been committed for a while. Josiah Miles and Josh Harris, both from North Florida, as you said, Colin. Miles, a 6'6" wing, 15.4 points per game this past year. Rebounds extremely well at 6'6" for 6.8 rebounds a game. 33.5% from three for Miles, and he is a junior. Both these guys are going to have multiple years of eligibility. Josh Harris, 6'8", a forward, 13.4 points per game, 7.1 rebounds a game, and a 33% three-point shooter. And Harris, only a sophomore. I remember Colin early in the year, there was so much talk about South Carolina early in the year about how it is the premier home game of the non-conference slate, and then South Carolina lost to North Florida in their opening game of the year. So it's kind of coming full circle, um, if you want to call it that. It's not really, but I'm going to call it that. With Harris and Miles committing. Do you see both these guys in the starting lineup right away?
Right away, no. But I wouldn't count out them starting later on in the season. And the reason I threw it to you first to talk about these two was because of that South Carolina game. That's what I wanted to talk about, and I didn't want to just start off with that. But in addition to beating South Carolina, their third game of the season, they beat Georgia Tech. And so that's two Power Five wins. And obviously they weren't great Power Five wins. But that's two Power Five wins for a team in North Florida that, no one's really paying attention to what they're doing early on in the season. And in that Georgia Tech game, Harris scored 22 points to lead the team. Josiah Miles had 11 rebounds to lead the team. And so Those are two impact players that went in and beat a Power Five school, in addition to beating another Power Five school in South Carolina. And so, these are two guys that, while I don't necessarily see them starting to begin the season, especially with Harris's uh, youth, he's only going to be a sophomore. He has so much room to grow. I think that he down the line is definitely somebody to watch, especially on the defensive end. I mean, he's a great defender, but he could score it as well. I mean, he just a great player. And so him and Josiah Miles are both going to make big impacts, whether it's starting or off the bench. Doesn't necessarily matter because Indiana's going to have a deep lineup where they're going to play a lot of players. And I think that'll certainly be to the advantage later on in the year.
The thing that stands out to me about both these guys, they're both wings. Harris more of your typical forward at the four, and Miles probably more of a three. But they combined last year for 13.9 rebounds a game, the two of them at North Florida. And for a team in Indiana last year that struggled with rebounding so much, even with the two big lineup, that's really a good sight to see. I like that both these guys have 2 years of eligibility at least, including this next one. Because a lot of the pickups in the portal tend to be seniors, especially for a program like Indiana. And that's what we see here. Um, we might as well just go through the full um, lineup of where class standings is right now. So there are two graduate seniors in Goody and DeVries, a sixth-year senior in Connerway. Wilkerson, Connor Enright, and Reed Bailey are all true seniors, along with Sam Alexis. There are three juniors, Josiah Miles, Jason Drake, and Nick Dorn, and then one sophomore, Josh Harris, and then, of course, Trent Sisley in the freshman class. So it's very senior heavy at the top. So having those guys to carry over, not have to fully rebuild your program every year, is nice. And we'll get through the rest of those guys that we haven't mentioned yet coming up. But on Miles and on Harris, I think these are two big time pickups.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like you mentioned, you know, this team is very experienced. I mean, you're gonna have guys in their fifth and even sixth year of college basketball, which is huge because the COVID guys are slowly being fizzled out, and the sport is gonna be younger than it has been in the past 2 to 3 years. So when you have those guys, you know, like Luke Goody, if he gets his waiver, Tucker DeVries, if he gets his waiver, although that is almost certain to be approved. Those are two guys that will not only make an impact on the floor with their skills, but off the floor as, veteran leaders that can really bring this group together because it's going to be filled with a bunch of players who haven't played before. And that's kind of been a big issue, at least last season it was for Mike Woodson's team. You have so many transfers, are they going to be able to mesh and really figure it out? Last year, not so much. There were, some rumors of issues within the locker room, and I think those were overblown for the most part. But you can kind of see on the floor there were some cohesiveness issues. And so this team, with a ton of transfers, almost every single player on the team, with the exception of some North Florida guys, haven't played together. And so the veteran leadership is going to be huge. But then the youth, for the years to come, you don't want to need to replenish your entire roster year after year. So you're going to need some guys like Harris and then like Sisley who can potentially play for years to come. And so I think this team has a nice mix of both.
That's going to come whenever there's a head coaching change, but it's something that, at least from a fan perspective, I would like to see less and less as the years go on. I mean, in college basketball, you have to balance the young guys with the transfers. And I mean, obviously, it was a good job from Florida because they won the national championship, but the roster building that Florida had for this year was fantastic, from the freshmen to the transfers to everybody in between. One of those seniors that will have a leadership role and a connection is Connor Enright. Connor Enright came from DePaul. He played at Drake for Darian DeVries, was teammates with Tucker DeVries there. Not going to blow you away with anything statistically, but he's an effort guy. 6 foot point guard, 7.5 points a game, 6.2 assists per game. Shot it just under 33% from three-point range last year at DePaul, but he's going to be it's kind of like the feeling of like a freshman year Gabe Cupps. Like he's going to come in, he's going to give you effort minutes and energy minutes. He may not give you all the stats that you want, but I think he's going to be a fun watch and likely a crowd favorite.
Oh yeah, for sure. He most likely won't start. He'll be coming off the bench. And he'll be coming off the bench, like you said, to bring energy. You know, when he committed, I saw a bunch of highlights of him. Over half of them were like on steals, where he dove for the ball, where he was just, bringing the energy. And that's what all basketball fans like to see. But for Indiana fans in particular, they love guys like that can bring the energy and are a team player. And and he's played with Tucker DeVries. And so again, like I mentioned before, having even a little bit of continuity really helps, especially with bringing a team together. And then now, obviously, he played in the Big East, and so he has some experience with DeVries, but then he has experience at the Power Five level. And I think he'll be a great pickup. And even if it's off the bench, you need quality players off the bench. You can't just have five guys. You're going to need players to come in, especially during the regular season. When you have, 3 games in a 9-day stretch or in a 10-day stretch, and, guys get weathered, guys get tired, you're going to need a guy like Connor Enright to fill in and to give you some quality minutes. And he can do exactly that, always with high energy.
Enright is going to be fun. I think if there's one guy that I'm excited to watch, it's not really a mainstream guy in the transfer portal. I think it's Enright. Those highlight tapes that you talked about, he was on the floor the entire tape, just diving for loose balls, and the emotion, the passion he plays with is super fun. And that was a fun DePaul team as well. Um, Odd little Indiana tidbit. Played with CJ Gunn last year at DePaul, just to put that out there. We haven't talked a little bit about. We've talked a little bit about Tucker DeVries, not in depth. DeVries is another one of those guys with Goody seeking a medical waiver. He'll get it. He didn't play more than I want to say 4 games this past year, something like that. Um, at West Virginia, 6'7" wing. In the games he played, 14.9 points per game. This is the big one here, though. 47% from three on high volume. He's got the green light, and he is not like this entire team is going to have the green light, and they're probably going to shoot much better than anything Indiana saw in the Mike Woodson era. Um, but DeVries, another experienced guy, does a little bit of everything, mostly just a pure shooter, and he'll be loving that first 12 seconds offense, I think.
Oh, for sure. And, you know, he's been a successful player. He was the Missouri Valley Player of the Year 2 times in a row at Drake. He's been in 2 NCAA tournaments. I mean, this is a guy that's won and won at a high level. And obviously, he goes to West Virginia, experiences an in injury early in the season, and is out for the rest of the year. But I think if he was healthy for that season, I think West Virginia, many say we're a tournament team regardless, but I think they would have been a very, very good basketball team. And I think that's kind of, not the same as what this Indiana team is going to be, but if you watch some of the West Virginia film of last season, at least when Tucker DeVries was in there, that's kind of what this Indiana team is going to look like. We've said it over and over again. The shooting, the quickness, the length, effort on defense turns into offense. That's what Darian DeVries said in his opening press conference, and I think Indiana fans are going to love to see that. And, the first player that comes to mind is Tucker DeVries, not only because he's his son, but because he embodies all of those qualities on the floor. He gives effort on defense. He's a good shooter. He might not be the most physical guy on the floor, but he gives effort 100% of the time. And for a team in Indiana that, some fans have said there have been effort issues over the past couple of seasons, that's exactly what you want to see.
I want to go off on that tangent a little bit. There's so much talk about culture and about how culture leads to winning. And it's a tradition on the House of Hoosier podcast to bring up Indiana football in every episode because why not? And that's something Indiana football did. Kurt Cignetti said the first thing he needed to do was change the thoughts on his program with culture. and did exactly that. And Indiana had a wildly successful season, established a culture that is going to likely lead to some long-term success. And I think that's what DeVries, like, it's very, very similar what happened with Indiana football and so far what's happening with Indiana basketball. Not just the same search agency that conducted the search for the head coaches, but it's really, taking a guy that has been proven as a winner on every level that he's played at in Darian DeVries, bringing guys that he trusts into year one, along with the so-called group of five for football or mid-major all-stars, which you could say for some of these guys here on the roster, and seeing what works and establishing a culture with those guys, changing everybody's perception of the team, the program, the culture, and seeing where that takes you. So far, it's worked for Indiana football. We'll see if it works for Indiana basketball. Um, but the the discussions from DeVries in the press conference, the guys that he's bringing in, it is going to be, for lack of a better word, kind of a culture shock for Indiana basketball fans, for a team that felt so stagnant, that felt kind of, out of it at points in the past couple of years. I think this is going to be completely different. This is a team that looks to be engaging more with the fan base. It looks to be it's like, adopting the modern style of basketball and navigating the world of college basketball that has changed so much. Um, it may take a little while to get used to that with Indiana basketball, but I do see that coming personally.
For sure. And the reason that Indiana football's transformation could happen, and the same reason that Indiana basketball is going to have a very talented roster is because of the transfer portal. You saw with the Tom Crean era, that wasn't that long ago. It was only, gosh, well, it's over 15 years ago now. But still, in this millennium, they were bad to start off the Tom Crean era. Just horrific. Some of the worst records Indiana basketball has ever seen. But then he found success later on, winning Big Ten championships, making Sweet 16s, etc. It doesn't take that long anymore. It takes one season. You saw it last year with Louisville. Louisville was one of the worst teams, maybe ever, a couple seasons ago. And then Pat Kelsey comes in, brings in a lot of transfers, brings in some great players from around the country, and bam, they're in the NCAA tournament. Obviously, the tournament didn't pan out for them like they thought it would, but still, it can happen in one season. Last year, the year before Florida won the NCAA tournament, they were bounced in the first round. Now they're champions. It could take one season. And so you don't want to get ahead of yourself if you're an Indiana basketball fan. You shouldn't expect, a Final Four this year. You shouldn't expect, hanging a Big Ten championship banner. But what you should expect is that this program is going to hit the ground running. It's not going to take 2 or 3 years before you start seeing success. You might see success in the first month of the season. You might say, wow, this is a really good basketball team, but it's with a bunch of guys that I never heard of before this year, and that's okay because you'll get to know them. And just like with Indiana football, you'll probably get to love them. And Darren DeVries said it's a process. Like Kurt Cignetti always says, he's a process-oriented guy. It's a process, but because of the transfer portal, that process has gotten a lot shorter. And you'll start seeing in November, things are changing, like you said, and I think Indiana fans will like it.
It's not like pro sports where if you're a fan of a rebuilding team, it'll take you, slowly progressing over 5 years, getting lucky a couple times, and then you'll finally be back into contention. Then you'll rise the year after, or in the playoffs, then you'll rise into contenders, and then you'll, continue to have your chances there. College sports are not like that anymore, like you said, Colin. And it's a money game. And the transfer portal, Indiana is fortunate to have those resources. And I believe it was top three nationally in NIL funds. And they obviously put them to use in this offseason. We'll finish out the roster here with guys that will probably be coming off the bench. The bench depth, before we get into this, has been a struggle for the past 2 years, and the drop off from starters to bench has been odd. The substitutions were weird at times. There was never really any consistency. This is a deeper bench group, at least looking right now, and these guys all fit the same kind of mold. So, coming in off a national championship, Sam Alexis, a 6'8" forward, 4.7 points a game last year for the Gators, shot 46% from the field. Nick Dorn from Elon, he may start. He's kind of a borderline guy. A 6'7" wing, 15.2 points per game, shot 35% from three, also about 4 rebounds a game. Jason Drake from Drexel, he will be coming off the bench, 11 points a game, 3 assists, 3 rebounds, did shoot just under 40% from three on some pretty good volume. And then, of course, the freshman that stuck around, Trent Sisley, a highly regarded prospect from Montverde Academy, Heritage Hills High School before that, back in Indiana. And he stuck around. He was a Woodson recruit, but he was more an Indiana guy than a Woodson specific recruit.
For sure. And, Sisley isn't the impact player that Braylon Mullins, could be for Indiana. And obviously, I'm sure IU would have still loved to have Mullins, but to get a guy that was previously committed under Mike Woodson and he stayed, it showed that Darian DeVries is a guy that, knows what Indiana basketball means. Because if he came in there, he might have said, Trent Sisley, I'm bringing my own guys. But he respects that Trent Sisley wanted to come to Indiana because it is Indiana. It's to quote Tom Crean again. But, DeVries said in his opening press conference, he knows what Indiana means. He knows the history, the culture, and that's why Sisley stayed. And that's why a lot of these guys have committed. They've a lot of reporters have reached out to these transfer commits, and a lot of them have said, when you walk into Assembly Hall for your official visit, you can kind of feel the history. And some of that comes from DeVries explaining to them, this is why I took this job. This is the vision I have for this program. And you can tell that DeVries understands what it will take to bring Indiana back. And like you mentioned, a bench that can succeed is a huge part of that. Nick Dorn might be a starter, but if he comes off the bench, 6'7", he can play guard and forward both at a high level. Jason Drake is a guy that you said he'll come off the bench, but he's another guy that can score. I mean, he was a double figure scorer at Drexel. I mean, he's a good player. Like, we're not talking about guys who come in knowing they're going to ride the bench and are okay with that. These guys want to succeed. And even if it's succeeding off the bench, basketball is a team game. Like I said earlier, it takes more than five to win a basketball game. And I think that a lot of these transfers understand that. And whether they're starting or coming off the bench, they're buying into what DeVries is selling them. And what he's selling them is we're going to build this program back up to what it can be.
Colin, you talk about basketball being more than five, but I'm going to ask you about the five right now. Early prediction at your starting lineup unofficially.
Hmm. That's tough just because there's a lot of guys who can do so many things. And so I think it'll be a lot of a matchup game. But I'll give you my five. Five right now. I think Tayton Connerway is kind of your starter at the one. And then over to the two, you've got Lamar Wilkerson. I think he's like the one guy you can definitely pencil into the starting lineup. And then for the three is where it gets interesting. And I think that you're going to look at Nick Dorn, you're going to look at Josiah Miles, you're going to look at Josh Harris potentially as guys that can play the three. As of right now, I honestly think I'm going to go with Josh Harris. I I I'm not sure he's going to start at the beginning of the season, but I think his potential is probably the highest of anyone on this roster just because he's only played one season of college basketball. And, he was the second leading scorer on a North Florida team that was really good. Obviously, the first leading scorer was Josiah Miles, and he could obviously start for the Hoosiers as well. For right now, I'll go with Harris. At the four, I've got Tucker DeVries. I think he's another guy you can definitely pencil in there. I think, in a small ball lineup, Tucker DeVries at the four is a great guy to have on your team. And then at the five, Reed Bailey. Um, and again, a small ball lineup. He's not a traditional five. He's not gonna, be camping out in the paint every play like, an Umar Bala would be. But I think that's a good thing. I think to have five out at sometimes it is a strategy that you're going to want to use, especially in games where you have a shooting advantage over the other team. And so those are my five. Again, matchups are dependent, but I think right now it's a good looking starting five.
And with that starting five, Colin, that leaves you a bench of, let's see, one, two, two double figure scores from last year, one Connor Enright as well. Gives you Luke Goody if he gets the waiver. It gets you Sam Alexis off the bench. I mean, there's depth. There really is. You could switch up the starting lineups even. If I take a stab at it, this is completely unofficial right now. Um, there's zero analysis going into my starting lineup pick. Here we go. I'll take Connerway and Wilkerson in the backcourt, Bailey at the five. Um, I could see I could see DeVries at the three, and I could see Harris at the four. Just watching his tape, he struck me as more of a four.
Hmm.
You could also switch that matchup wise with Miles and also Luke Goody a different factor there as well. But then that would leave you Harris off the bench. That would leave you Dorn off the bench. That would leave you um, Luke Goody potentially would give you Trent Sissy. Like any combination, you're going to have guys that can shoot the ball, that can play fast, that can play defense at any spot in the roster. My hope is that none of these guys care where and when they play.
And those are the guys you need. I mean, even a guy like Sam Alexis, neither of us had him in our starting five, but he's a guy that played for Florida, obviously, and is a national champion and didn't play a whole lot. But I'm sure if you asked him, he wouldn't have traded that experience or anything. He got to be a national champion, and yet he didn't necessarily play, I'm sure, as much as he wanted to. But, that's the kind of mentality that Indiana needs to have. You know, Not necessarily national championship or bust expectations, but an expectation where I may not play 25 minutes every game or even most games. If I'm playing 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes a game, they're going to be the best 15 or 20 minutes that I'm giving this basketball team. And with the depth, I think that's certainly possible. One game you may rely on Lamar Wilkerson to score 30 points, right? But then other games, Wilkerson might, have an off game and where you're going to need Josh Harris to step up. Nick Dorn, I mean, he's a guy from Elon that could score 20 points any given game, right? So it's not about relying on your best players as it is relying on a team as a whole. And when your best players are playing their best, everybody's role kind of fits into place.
That was kind of what we saw in different ways the past 2 years, where 2 years ago they relied on the best player. It was Khalil Ware. And when Ware had an off day, it was a little bit of a rough going for Indiana. There was not really any star power to pick him up. Last year, it was more of a balanced effort trying to get guys involved, but nothing really, like there wasn't really a true star that could take over any game. And it something just didn't click with that group. This group, we'll see if it's any different. Still plenty of time and still plenty of um, time to evaluate transfer prospects as well for potentially another big man. At least that would be my hope from a fan perspective. But we talk about success in the Big Ten. We talk about success in the postseason. There is some Big Ten news in the opponents got getting released on the home, away, and both slates. Home only, Indiana will be facing Iowa, Nebraska, Northwestern, Oregon, Penn State, Washington, and Wisconsin. Away only, these are a little bit tough. Illinois, Maryland, Michigan, Ohio State, Rutgers, UCLA, and USC. And then the home and away, Michigan State, Minnesota, and Purdue. Anything strike you here, Colin?
Well, funny you should ask. I did write yesterday a takeaways story on this very topic, and the three takeaways I had were that the home success will determine overall success. Road schedule is an absolute gauntlet, and that, you know, there won't be strength of schedule issues, I feel like, for this team. The last couple seasons, they were 10 and 10 in Big Ten play back-to-back years. And a lot of times 10 and 10 should get you a tournament bid, but it didn't. Just because there weren't really many opportunities aside from really tough road environments where, okay, you're getting a quad one loss. And then what the committee mentioned was, oh, they didn't have many quad two wins. This schedule, I feel like, is going to have a lot of quad one games, but it's going to have a lot of quad two games as well, where it's still early and it's hard to tell at this moment. But I think that the schedule will play to Indiana's advantage, and that'll come with the non-conference schedule. You have matchups with Louisville, you have a matchup with Kentucky. Those are two teams that are expected to be top 10 teams next year. And then when you look at the Big Ten schedule, the road schedule is an absolute gauntlet, right? So if you win four of those 10 games and then take care of business at home, you're looking at a 12, 13, 14 maybe win team in the Big Ten. And that will obviously be good enough for a tournament bid, maybe top four seed. And so like I said, still early, but these are the kinds of things that kind of have to go your way sometimes in order to get a better seed. Because in 2023, when they were a four seed, they were 12 and 8 in conference. And then the last 2 years, 10 and 10, missed the tournament. So that's a two-game difference only between a four seed and missing the tournament. And it all depended on the type of schedule they had. And so I think this year will be more advantageous for them.
The non-conference you talk about, I just want to say it is so awesome to see Midwest powerhouses go like just going back to playing each other. Louisville, Kentucky, Marquette also at the United Center. I know that's not really a Midwest powerhouse blue blood, but Marquette's a great program, and that at the United Center will
Mhm.
be a good time. Um, the Louisville at Gainbridge is a very interesting part of the schedule. I mean, obviously it's likely going to be an Indiana home game, but Louisville fans travel well, and there are a lot of them here in Indiana as well. So we'll see. That could be a fun matchup. Is there a game you are most excited for? One in the non-con and one in the Big Ten, one that you could think could turn the tide of the season.
Well, I will say I'm most looking forward to the Kentucky game, first and foremost. But that is out of the three kind of big games we've mentioned, that's the last one. Marquette is all the way up in November. It'll be, I think it's Sunday, November 8th or 9th. That'll be kind of like, I think it might be their second game of the regular season, second or third game. And that game will be telling because if they go into the United Center, I expect it to be pretty close in terms of crowd. I mean, if they go in there and win that, then they have momentum. But if they lose that, and then you go to play Louisville on December 6th, that's going to be a really tough game. I mean, Louisville, I've seen them top three in way too early rankings. That's a game you can drop easily. And then you play Kentucky at Kentucky, December 13th, just a week later. It's a slippery slope, and we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but the Marquette game is a game that I circle and I'm like, that is one that you don't have to have, obviously, but it's one that you would really, really like to have. And then in terms of the conference schedule, obviously we don't have dates and kind of I will say timing is everything. But I think the away games are huge, but the home games are even bigger. And I think the home games are favorable. You get Washington at home, if that game was played last season, I mean, IU would be favored by double digits. You get Penn State at home. That's not necessarily a great program. They missed the Big Ten tournament last season. Northwestern, not sure how good they'll be, you know, and then you have Nebraska and Iowa, not great. Then you've got Oregon and Wisconsin, two good teams from last year, but might regress. And then you have your double play opponents, Michigan State, Purdue, Minnesota. And so that 10 game home schedule, I'm thinking that 8 wins is the expectation personally. And so I think that all those home games you circle and it's like you have to take care of business.
Yeah, it feels like all the tougher opponents were like, "Oh, we'll put you in the away slate or in the home and away," which makes the home games more important, like you said, because you can't lose them. If you lose bad games, that hurts you just as much as it helps to win against good opponents. So we'll have to see. The destination on the conference slate that hopefully I can make it out to is the barn at Minnesota. That's been a bucket list item for me. Hopefully I'll be able to go out there and see what happens and see the raised floor and the old school look of the barn at Minnesota. Um, yeah, only time will tell. Still no dates on these schedules and opponents. Colin, you said time is everything. I agree wholeheartedly, but it's a little look at the offseason, the roster. It is still a work in progress, so keep an eye on that. We'll keep you posted as the offseason rolls along. Colin, thanks again for joining today.
Thanks for having me. I mean, the season might start in, you know, 6 months, but I'm excited. This is a new era with DeVries and, all the coverage here at the House of Hoosier podcast, but also go over to thehoosier.com, a part of On3. We've got you covered over there as well.
TheHoosier.com does some great work. Colin, one of the members over there, we'll have you updated throughout the season. A new co-host is in the works. We're working on that for next season. We'll keep you posted for everything.